Hey YouTube, well, continuation from the Vinyl Professor's thread. He asked about your least favourite 80s albums. So conversely, let's talk about your favourite 80s albums. If you like the video, please subscribe, please comment in the comments section and give me a thumbs up if you agree, or a thumbs down if you disagree, I suppose. But I wanted to do was just pull out some albums from the 80s that I still really enjoy listening to. And even though some of them might have some questionable 80s production, they're actually, you can almost see past the 80s production on these albums. Some songs I think were written for the 80s, and it was just, when you hear them, you couldn't imagine them performed any other way. And my first pick is an album that's not from an artist, it's actually from a motion picture. But the songs on this album are so over the top and so cheesy and go so well with the movie that I felt that this soundtrack really had to go into the my favourite 80s albums, I guess. So here it is, Rocky IV. You've got songs from Survivor on this album. You've got songs like The Burning Heart. Anyone that seen Rocky IV will know that. Hearts on Fire. The Eye of the Tiger's also on the album. Then you've got James Brown doing Living in America in a really cheesy 80s way. It's just a lot of fun. The whole album's a lot of fun. And when I saw it, I just had to pick it up because I love Rocky IV and I love the songs from Rocky IV. And I couldn't imagine the songs from Rocky IV being produced in sort of a 90s way or a 70s way. They live in the 80s, they were made for the 80s, and they're produced for the 80s. My next pick of an 80s album that I think is a really great album that was released in the 80s is an album that I made reference to on my response to James's original video. Donald Fagen, The Nightfly, is the album. This is an absolute classic. If you're going past James's channel, then for God's sake, check out his review of Donald Fagen, The Nightfly. I'm not going to even attempt to do a review, retrospective of this album because James did such a great job and his video on this album is second to none. But the album is absolutely second to none. I've got the CD of this album as well, and I have to say, and I think I mentioned this in the previous video, I don't like the CD print of this at all. It's never been re-released, remastered, so presumably they could do a better job with the CD. But the CD that I have sounds really thin and terrible. And I didn't expect much of this record when I first purchased it. And I purchased it at an absolute bargain price of I think about £2 from a car boot. But when I got the record home and I put it on the turntable, I realised the quality of the music that had been produced by Donald Fagen. And I also realised that this is a fantastic sounding album. I just don't know what went wrong with the CD press of it. It's an album I know that used to be used to showcase hi-fi systems in the 80s when salesmen were selling them. So I was really surprised when I got the CD and it sounded so thin. But this doesn't sound thin at all. This sounds absolutely great. It does have a smidgen of 80s production on it, but the musicianship's so high and the 80s production is not so bad that it makes the album unlistenable. The next album is the first album I ever remember owning. My mum bought it for me the week it came out, so this is a first press of the album because this is the same copy of the album I had as a child, and it's been played and played and played. But I think it's an album that really personifies the 80s. It's an artist that personifies the 80s. It's Michael Jackson. It's bad, but it's not bad, it's actually really good. The album is just full of hits. Bad, obviously, The Way You Make Me Feel, Just Good Friends, Liberian Girl, Dirty Diana with that sizzling guitar solo from Slash, Smooth Criminal, Man in the Mirror, I Just Can't Stop Loving You. I mean, every track on this album, was a huge hit, apart from perhaps Another Part of Me with Stevie Wonder, which everyone seems to hate, but even that track I think is a really good track. Is it an album I listen to a lot now? Probably not, but it's an album I've got really fond memories of. And when you listen to it back, it really stands up. The production on it is 80s. It was produced by Quincy Jones, but it's not so overproduced that it sounds, huge drums. That's not on this album. When you listen to this album, everything's beautifully recorded on it, beautifully mixed, really professionally mixed. And I think it's probably one of Michael Jackson's best albums. I think maybe Off the Wall was his best album. This was his second best album, and then Thriller. The reason I put Thriller below this is because it's got some questionable choices in terms of the songs on it. The Girl Is Mine, cheesy as it is, and McCartney, I Love You, but come on now. Say Say was probably a better song on McCartney's album with Michael Jackson. But this album was really, really great. And I saw Michael Jackson in the 1980s at Wembley Stadium, and that made me even more excited about this album. And it got played and played and played, and I'm so glad that I still have my original copy. And even as an 8-year-old boy, I knew how to handle records, because this is the impressive part. It hasn't got a blemish on it. I must have really looked after this record, because believe me, I played it. And as you can see, it's actually coming through there slightly to show you how much I did play it. And, you know, the white sleeve's now slightly discoloured. But it's a great album. I know that Tesco's and Sainsbury's are selling records, and this is one of the records that they sell. They must sell loads of copies of it. But it's going for like 18 quid. You can pick this record up for £1 when I first started collecting records. I love the idea that Bad was originally supposed to be a duet between Michael Jackson and Prince. That would have been brilliant. You know, you've got Michael Jackson saying, I'm bad, and then Prince is going, I'm badder. But apparently Prince sort of pulled out of the whole thing. And I don't think Michael Jackson was that keen either, because as I understand it, there was a huge rivalry between Michael Jackson and Prince in the 80s. But Michael absolutely got my vote. This is a fantastic album. And as I say, so many tracks on this album were hit singles. That's unheard of now. You look at them, Bad was a hit single, The Way You Make Me Feel was a hit single, Man in the Mirror was a hit single, Smooth Criminal was a hit single, Dirty Diana was a hit single. And then there were other tracks that were released that weren't as popular, but were nevertheless popular singles. I'm sure that Speed Demon was released as a single, and Just Good Friends. Correct me if I'm wrong on that point. But I had the album, so I didn't need to buy the singles. But wow, what a great 80s album that is. That sort of personifies the 80s in a good way. The next album is an 80s album that is superb. What great songwriting on this album. And it's an artist that doesn't get a lot of kudos, but I think this is her most popular album. And the album is Tracy Chapman's album, which has Fast Car on it. And Fast Car, we all know that track. It's just such an amazing song. Talking About a Revolution is on this album. What else is on the album? What's that song that Ronan Keating killed? There was a song that he killed that was just absolutely terrible. I can't remember what the song was called now. But this is a fantastic album. You'll know every song on it. It's like when you hear it, you think, wow, what a great piece of work this is. And if you haven't ever heard this album, I would absolutely suggest you go and pick it up, because it is one of the gems of the 80s. Tracy Chapman's self-titled first album. I don't know a lot of her other stuff, to be fair. I normally get into an artist and get lots and lots of their work, and I haven't with Tracy Chapman, and I need to. But this is an absolute staple. It's always been played in the car, and it's a great album to have on vinyl. And again, this is a copy of the vinyl from the 80s that tells me that the record, the CD, and the tape is available. I love that. So Tracy Chapman's self-entitled album, and the next album from the 80s is a band again who personify the 80s, but probably in a good way. It's Guns N' Roses. It's Appetite for Destruction. You've got Slash absolutely killing it, and Axl Rose killing it on this album. Sweet Child of Mine, Welcome to the Jungle. I mean, you just don't get better than that for a rock band in the 80s. I would have put like a Bon Jovi, but I think like Bon Jovi are kind of a soft take on Guns N' Roses. If you're going to go for it, you know, that is what the 80s should look like, right? I mean, look at Slash in that picture. God knows how much he's had to drink. But that's a rock and roll band right there. You know, that's the Rolling Stones of the 80s, Guns N' Roses. I'm really disappointed that I missed their tour last year. I didn't realise they were touring. And then I was on YouTube and I saw Guns N' Roses Wembley Stadium. And I was, oh no, and I missed them. But that is a really great album of the 80s. So yeah, they're my sort of top albums of the 80s. Other great albums of the 80s, early 80s album, I talked about Phil Collins in the last video with No Jacket Required, but Face Value is a top album. You've got Eric Clapton playing the guitars on parts of this. It's beautifully recorded. It sounds more like a 70s album, but probably because it was recorded, I think, in 1980. Certainly the very early 80s, but that is also going to be a top pick. You want something a bit cheesy from the 80s? Bryan Adams, Reckless. This is a cool album from the 80s if you're into that sort of slightly cheesy take, but it's got Summer of '69 on it, One Night Love Affair, She's Only Happy When She's Dancing, Run to You. It's Only Love with Tina Turner. You know, really, really top songs. Really, Bryan Adams at his peak. It's cheesy like all Bryan Adams, but you know what? It's fun to listen to occasionally. Then if you want like a reference for your stereo system, there's an album from the 80s that almost everybody still goes to, and that's the Sade album, Diamond Life. This sounds absolutely fantastic. It's got Smooth Operator on it. It's an album to sort of put on, turn the lights down, kick back. It sounds beautiful when you put it on. I haven't heard the CD, but this album sounds fantastic. I would absolutely recommend it to sort of showcase your stereo system. So there's some of my top picks from the 80s. Let me know your top picks. James, Sean, hit me back with your top picks. And anybody else that wants to get involved in the thread. Until next time, this is the Media Preacher. Keep on preaching. See you soon.